Welcome back, Seekers of the Divine. I am sitting down with Dr. Ivana Bajic-Hajdukovic today, and she not only has a remarkable background, but also an exceptional story to tell. Eva spent decades in global academia researching grief, motherhood, and war, and teaching at institutions including the University of Belgrade and Syracuse University in London. Following a pivotal shift in 2020, she bridged her academic work with intuitive practice, guiding PhD students while stepping into her path as a spiritual medium and energy healer. Today, she leads transformational Nile pilgrimages, helping others move through sorrow and reconnect with their inner source. Now, I had the honor of Eva joining Destination Awakening, my brand new docu-series that just launched. And in her episode, she talks more in depth about the rivers of remembrance and the Nile as initiatory pathway. So go ahead and watch her episode right after this conversation. You'll learn some fascinating things and also have the possibility to receive a discount on the Nile journey that is calling you. So we'll link the episode in the show notes. But for now, welcome, Eva. I feel very honored to speak to you today.
Thank you, Julia, for this warm welcome. It is a pleasure and honor to share this space with you and to feature as part of your Sacred Travel podcast series. It is an amazing company to be with. So thank you.
Well, thanks for being here. And, we don't want to give too much of a spoiler alert, because people also should go and definitely watch your episode about the Nile pilgrimage and the journey itself. But I would love also for us to go a little bit personal today. So you spent 20 years in high-level academia at the UCL and also Syracuse. What was the threshold moment for you during, you shared with me, the pandemic, actually, that gave you the courage to step out of that, what so many women have, and also, I actually call it in the very same way, the spiritual closet, into your role as a medium and a healer as well?
I think this is really, thank you for this question. I think it's really important to start opening these dialogues and spaces where it is safe to discuss about this, because so many of us are going through our daily lives, our corporate jobs, or whatever it is that we do, as not just wearing one hat, as managers, as lecturers, as whatever else we do. But we also may be partners. We may be, having all these different roles as different family members. And on top of all of that, we are first and foremost spiritual beings. I never believe that we should be separate, that we are either, we are not just material beings. We're not just in this body, but we are embodied consciousness. And as we go through our adult years, and I think for women in particular, this threshold in that happens around late 30s, early 40s, where everything, our biology starts to change. And with that, our brain chemistry starts to change, our outlook, what matters, what our priorities in life are, all of that starts to shift and change, which is, I think it's not a surprise at all that so many women, when they start going through this transition period in our midlife, start to experience awakenings, which we cannot ignore. I don't think an awakening necessarily is something that happens from one day to another. It can go on for a very long period of time, can go on for years. But there is a moment where we feel we cannot ignore what we are aware of, what we're experiencing on a somatic level, in everyday lives. And there comes a point where we just say, okay, some things need to change. And for me, that moment coincided with the global pandemic of coronavirus several years ago. And it also coincided with the fact that my job changed, as well as jobs of so many people who were working in education and across other sectors as well. And it certain things where you may go through life, as an employee and working in a particular place, with noticing certain inconsistencies or certain things that you feel you are not aligned with. But when something extreme happens, like coronavirus pandemic, everything was amplified. And so did all these sort of small misalignments. They suddenly became not small any longer. They became quite significant. And I realized that the place where I was and what I felt as my calling and my path, because I felt deeply passionate about working with young people in higher education, about being a lecturer. I started lecturing when I was very young. I was in my early 20s when I first started teaching at University of Belgrade, a Greek cultural history of Greece and Greek civilization. And it was amazing. I loved the experience. So I was teaching for close to 20 years. And then I realized that it was not the actual job, but it was the environment, the institutions that somehow did not seem like the right home for me and for the right choice for the purpose that I felt I had in this lifetime. And I felt it was time to change.
That is very brave as well. I think it's like one of the most bravest steps that, yeah, one can actually take. And you named it, there are so many. And I come from a corporate background, but I do agree it's like so similar, I guess, also from what you've already shared and what you're sharing with like women or just like in general, human beings who are waking up to these higher truths in academia as well. So what, after your experience, what must a highly trained intellectual person be willing to dismantle in order to access this true spiritual authority?
I have to say it was a heartbreaking moment for me because the academic path is a bit awkward in the sense that we tend to identify our entire identity with what we do. So we don't say, I work in academia, but we say, I'm an academic. And whenever we say, the more we repeat, I am, I guess it's a little bit for creatives, similar. Like when we say, people will barely, a writer will not say, I write. They will say, I'm a writer. People will not say, I sing, but they will say, I'm a singer. So we start to identify our entire selves with what we do. And I'm not going to lie to you, it really created an identity crisis in me. Who am I if I'm not an academic? And I had to work a lot on removing various layers and peeling layers of conditioning, of beliefs, of what is mine, what did I inherit from my ancestors in terms of values and beliefs about identity, and what is society telling us. And I guess that one of the things that I encountered was the collective witch wound, which is a real thing. It's something
Yeah.
that exists in the collective. It has been there. A lot of the people going through awakening processes are experiencing the stalling in this awakening process because of that collective witch wound. Because we feel, I feel that is my calling. I want to retrain as a healer, or I want to follow the path of a medium or a path of a shamanic arts practitioner. And then we stumble across this collective sense of either persecution or like it is not safe for me to be publicly practicing or to be seen in public or to even say to someone. And for me, one of the sort of tests was if a mom at school gate asks me what I do, because my children at some point transition from one class to another, from one school to another. So there will always be somebody new asking me, what is it that you do? Oh boy, it was not easy to take a deep breath and to say, I'm an energy healer or I'm a medium,
Yes.
And I feel that this is not just coming from us personally. Some of it probably is, but not everything. And it was an invitation to start unpicking which of these layers we have brought into this lifetime from the collective wounding, for being wise men, wise women, for being healers, for working with herbs. And I would say that working with ancestors was so helpful in the sense that, when I cast my gaze back, I realized that so many women in my family were exchanging recipes about herbal medicine, about various tinctures that
Mhm.
they were making at home. And when I would ask, I remember there was a particular recipe that my aunt shared with me, which apparently saved someone in the family, wider family, during the First World War, then during the Second World War. So it was passed down and shared by the women in the family because they stayed at home. They had to look after the children and the wounded when they would come back home from the front. And nobody was talking about, or these women were not talking about their practices as witchcraft in any shape or form. However, if you look through the history, this is exactly what women, wise women and men, were tried for knowing about the herbal medicine, knowing how to use them, where to source them, and dispensing them. So it was, but it was passed down as a family recipe that saved somebody's leg when they came back, when there were no antibiotics, for example, during the time of the First World War or the interwar period. And the recipe was still used. And my aunt, she was, she passed last year, she passed on to spirit, but she was an electrical engineer. So she had two firmly planted feet on the
An
ground.
energy worker, just in a different way.
Exactly. And yet she had these amazing recipes. And the same about my mother. She was an economist. And yet, after she passed away, there were piles of notes about various herbal remedies and how to use them for healing. So I think there is a lot of strength to be found when we start looking towards our ancestors and our family heritage, where we are coming from. I'm coming from Southeast Europe, and I feel that this connection with the land is quite strong there, or it was quite strong. And the more I was speaking to various family members, the more I realized that there was a strong lineage of healers that I actually came from, but nobody had ever explicitly said so. So, for example, my other aunt was telling me about my grandfather, her dad, who was able to tell them how the season was going to be by sort of looking at the shoulder blade of a ram. And he was able to locate the source of the water, the wells on the new field, if they had to move, and they were migrating a lot in the early 20th century around the Balkans. So you realize that certain things are passed down through the family, but because of the social and cultural conditioning and how this wisdom was treated by the society, we learned that to be a wisdom keeper, you have to be very discreet, which is where I feel the so-called my coming out of spiritual closet several years ago took many years, longer than I anticipated, and why it was a bit, so painful. And part of the reason, I will be perfectly honest here with you and with all the listeners, also came from the fact that in academia, there is really no space for exploring the supernatural. We can explore, and we do in anthropology explore supernatural from the academic point of view. So we will work with shamans, we will look at their practices in Siberia, where shamanism originally is from or has started, or at least the word. I don't want to say that shamanism started there. Shamanism exists everywhere around the world, or shamanic practices, but the word shaman is coming from Siberia. So we will study that, but we will place that in the context of particular culture. We will try to explain that by looking at the cosmology of those indigenous cultures. We will certainly not try to embody the work that we are studying or practice it.
I know many of you have been waiting for this trip. From June 20th to 24th, we are going to be roaming this mountain, Sambam, the holy mountain of Mary Magdalene, in a powerful pilgrimage initiation. And this mountain is a stargate, and it reveals your light body architecture in a very visceral, felt way with a heart cave, a yoni cave, and also what you see on top here, the third eye point, your oracular vision. So journey with us into Heart Womb Oracle, a sacred pilgrimage in the Magdalene lands of Sambam, the south of France, in June. You'll find the link in the show notes. Registration is open now. I think you just really hit the nail on the head. And I'd be super curious to hear from you how, with that shift that you made, which very often I feel is also, when we give ourselves permission to do that, we provide another role model and template for others to do the same. So you are still in the field of teaching. And how has your way of coaching or also, teaching your students changed by now, maybe blending more the logic and the intuition and bringing both of them together in the classrooms, but also in what you shared with me and what I just find utterly beautiful, that the world is a living classroom. So how do you apply that also on your pilgrimage?
That is a wonderful question. And I think that and I'm deeply indebted to the last place where I worked for 7 years, almost, Syracuse University in London, for allowing me to use London as an open classroom. Because I have to say, with all due respect, British universities are much more conservative. We would not be allowed to take our students. There would be an odd lesson, where we would take students when, for example, I was at University College London and prior to Syracuse University, and there were a few occasions where we were allowed to take students outside the classroom, for example, to take them to the British Museum when we were looking at specific galleries and how museums can be decolonized, or whether when we wanted to have a debate between students about how, whether the artifacts should be returned to the countries where they were originally from, or whether they should remain as part of collections of the British Museum. So obviously, because UCL is a stone's throw away from the British Museum, it made a lot of sense to then take students to see and to have that debate there in person. But that was usually an exception. Normally, classes were in the sort of between the closed walls and behind the doors. So when the opportunity came up I was told, use London as a classroom. At first, there was a sense of excitement, a sense of, overwhelm. Oh my goodness, how do we do this? But more than anything, it was so creative and feeling that freedom. And it really opened my awareness into possibilities of using the world as an open classroom. Why do we think that learning necessarily needs to happen inside the four walls? We learn everywhere. If you think and look at how children learn, they learn best when they're out and about, when they are playing, when there is laughter, when there is creativity. They learn through play. They learn by engaging different senses. And all the studies always show that the best learning is multisensory one and the experiential one. So when we immerse ourselves in a particular setup, when we can smell, when we can touch, when we can observe, listen, when we can move with a space, all of a sudden, this is not just something that is landing in our auditory or visual awareness, but it becomes an embodied experience. And this is where the idea and the the kernel of this sort of passion behind the Nile pilgrimage came about. That's how it was born. I realized that I felt this frustration of wanting to open up anthropology. And we are always taught and told as anthropologists that this is the most human of the social sciences. And I could not agree more with that. And yet, it is the least known of the social sciences. I was always feeling somehow that I was betraying my discipline and the people I was studying, because there was so much beauty, so much excitement that I wanted to share with the world about what we are experiencing during our field work, the encounters, magical encounters with people, with land, because we study not just communities and the people, we study their interactions with animals, their interactions with lands. So it is a holistic experience. And yet, the experience that is confined to very narrow academic sort of realm. And during the pandemic, I held, together with a colleague of mine, Dr. Julie Botticello, who is senior lecturer at University of East London, we did a series of workshops about the place of anthropology in the 21st century in the global world. And because everything moved online and we had time and space to do it online, we had participants from different parts of Africa taking part, including a group of young people who grew up in the refugee camp Kakuma in Kenya. Some of them were third generation born into the refugee camp. So their grandparents arrived to that camp as refugees from Somalia in the early 1990s. And because they do not have any official documents, they're not allowed to leave the camp. They do not have documents either of Somalia or Kenya or any other country. So this young man, incredibly clever, he gave a talk at the Davos Forum that year, or the year before that. He was offered a place to study at Princeton University, and it was fully funded. And yet he couldn't go because he had no official documents or papers with which he could leave the country or enter the United States. And we were discussing on these workshops whether there is space for anthropology and how it can serve the world and what it can do for the world. And again, this was another spark. So it's a little bit like when you are trying to start a fire. It's not just one spark that starts it, but like you start from different ends. So that was another spark that sort of lit the fire of the Nile pilgrimage. How I can open up this beautiful social science and bring people into direct contact with sacred lands, with wisdom keepers, with communities that have the knowledge that we in the Western world have either forgotten or lost. So that was another idea, to not having to choose between academic side and anthropology or spiritual path, but to bring them together in this explorative, initiatory path of the Nile pilgrimage.
Which is super powerful, and I feel a very unique also way of looking at things, because so far, like when I look at, there's the classical Nile pilgrimages, of course, but then there is also the spiritual Nile pilgrimages that focus a lot like on Egypt itself, as the Egyptian temples, as the initiatory pathway. And so your lens, which is like even the wider one, you often speak about the three medicines of the Nile. I would love for you to guide us a little bit and like broaden our views on, yes, the Nile is definitely an initiatory pathway. I think we all agree on that. And within itself, there's different concepts or even like pathways that you can apply to it. So what is that broader arch, how you see it and the journey that you take people on?
And thank you again for this amazing question and comment about the Nile pilgrimage, because we often will hear, people taking others and groups on the Nile pilgrimage in Egypt. And it's always, without a mistake, the Egyptian affair. And I am never going to deny the power that the Nile and the experience that we can have doing the Nile pilgrimage in Egypt. But Egypt, for me, felt like a place of transcendence. It really is the place where the consciousness of the River Nile is meeting the stones, it's meeting the temples. So this is where the alchemy between the water and the earth comes together, and it transcends, and it sort of becomes something else. It helps humanity. It helps us rise above our earthly experience and connect with something wider, bigger than us. To me, it feels like it was a connection with our ancestors, our star ancestors. It is a realization that we are not alone, that this planet does not exist in isolation from everything and everybody else in our universe. And this is what Egypt does to us. It really helps us kind of rise and raise our frequency. However, the river flows way below Egypt. And I was curious and I felt, where does it come from? Where is the womb of this river? Where does the earth give birth to the Nile? And when I started, sort of first it was engaging through meditation with Gaia. And I have to say that I do work with energy of the earth. I'm a big fan of the work of geomancy work pioneered by Slovenian activist and writer Marko Pogačnik, who writes about a lot. He's been working and doing a lot of work with the earth grids. So he's been doing a lot of grid work and training people in grid work and lithomancy, positioning stones in a particular way so that they work a bit like needles in acupuncture to release the energy flows and any blocked energies on the earth meridian. So looking at our planet Earth as a living body, and not just physical body, but body of consciousness and wisdom. And when you approach the earth from that perspective, the Nile becomes one of the, I don't want to say most significant, but incredibly significant lines. In some cultures, it is called a dragon line because it is as very long, it is natural, it follows the spine of our earth. And it really brings and births so much. It is no coincidence, I would say, that along the River Nile, along its banks, is where the humanity first started and where we are finding the oldest human remains across Eastern Africa, anywhere around the Rift Valley. But when you look at the map of Eastern Africa and the Great Rift Valley, all these areas around Kenya, around Ethiopia, there are all these sort of dots where the oldest remains were found. Officially, the oldest remain was found in Ethiopia, but the difference is the time is so deep when you look at how old these human remains are, whether it is 3.2 million years ago or 3.1 or 2.8, it is still very, very distant past. And again, I would say it is no coincidence that we have this fabulous, magnificent body of water sitting on the equator. And it is officially it is shared between different countries, Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya. But I would say for me, it feels like the womb of our Mother Earth and the place where the River Nile is born. It is called in that first bit, again, a colonial name, Victoria Nile or the White Nile in Uganda. And it starts its journey. And I think it's really amazing to, when you think about the power of the river, it is flowing from south to north. It's almost going backwards, and it is so powerful. Wherever you look along the River Nile, whether you're in Uganda and looking at these amazing rapids on the White Nile in Uganda, you will find rapids of grades 3, 4, 5, 6. People have no idea that Nile can be as wild as that. And then as you move towards the Blue Nile in Ethiopia, which is where 80% of the Egyptian Nile and the volume of water in Egyptian Nile comes from. It's from Ethiopian Blue Nile, or Abai. When you look at the fact that, again, the Blue Nile is conceived and it's coming from Lake Tana, again, the biggest lake in Ethiopia. All these beautiful lakes are birthing these rivers that are then forming, coming together, the White Nile and the Blue Nile in today's Sudan. And from there, they're continuing their journey across Sudan and north towards Egypt. But again, it doesn't stop in Egypt. When I was last year doing my ritual of honoring the waters and bringing together the waters of the Blue Nile and the White Nile and delivering them into the Nile Delta, I sat there meditating and I was looking at the Delta Nile and wondering, these waters are all now going into the Mediterranean Sea. And from there, they're meeting all these other rivers and seas and kissing the shores of all these magnificent places in the world. So in a way, to me, it felt like the River Nile was holding the whole planet in its embrace, because it is the place that birthed human civilization, where it all started. And it is no coincidence that all these temples in Egypt are dotted along the River Nile.
I want to encourage everybody who is listening to that and feels like super intrigued now. Eva is sharing a lot more on all of that in her episode on Destination Awakening. So hop on over. We're also going to be linking the episode so you can flag it to watch later. There's two things that you said that really struck me. And one is more connected to Uganda and the root, where you describe it as almost like a medicine of original innocence. And the other one, which if I recall correctly, you tie it like to the Ethiopian part that you just talked about, like the Blue Nile, where there is ancient Coptic traditions that teach about the vertical connection and the alchemy of turning suffering into light. And I feel like both of them really speak to, of course, what like all of the traditions we're going into. Like for me, it's more, the Magdalene Christ lineage that I dive very deeply in it, but also that part where it's not about the suffering. It's like turning the suffering into an alchemy where it comes a sacred responsibility to transmute it and alchemize it. So how have you seen that, like both that original innocence, medicine of innocence? I love that word, how you describe that, brings this energy within and without, like up, so that we hold the codes and can access the codes within ourselves to really harness and own this vertical connection.
Right. It is the alchemy that happens in our bodies as we move with a landscape. And I deliberately say with and not through, because we do work with landscapes. We're not there just as visitors, but we give something to the landscape that we carry, because it is through our physical movement that we are actually transporting parts of energy from one part of the land into another. And this is what happens during the Nile pilgrimage. So we start from the source of the Nile in Uganda, and we harness this initiatory energy of Genesis almost, where everything is in the beginning, when there is this forward motion and movement. And we then take that with us in our bodies to the highlands of Ethiopia, to all these sacred places where the oldest Christianity was born. And it really becomes the place where you start to experience that, yes, there is something beyond the suffering. When you look at Ethiopian churches, some of the oldest churches, a lot of them will be built in the stone. Some of them were carved, the most famous one of the Lalibela, but there will be churches up in the north that were built high up in the mountains, where the idea is that as you climb, there is the ascension process where you are physically climbing the mountain to reach the church. But while doing that, people are climbing without any harnesses. That's how the priests go up into those churches, and any visitors as well. So this is not meant for hiking and for mountaineering, but it is a spiritual journey that people undertake. And it is exactly doing what I'm sort of trying to do with the Nile pilgrimage, where we blend the physical with the metaphysical journey. So while we are doing the physical journey of climbing to reach those churches high up in the mountains in Ethiopian highlands, we are also overcoming something, our mortality, and we are going beyond this sort of any earthly experiences and feelings of fear, lack of trust, and we are meeting divine inside of our heart as we are doing the physical journey. So this, for me, is what happens in Ethiopia, this alchemy of the sort of the initial fire that was ignited in Uganda or Ugandan part of the Nile, then gets transformed as we try to reach and access these beautiful Coptic churches in the highlands. And by doing so, we have to go over and above our physical limitations, and especially what our brain is telling us, about fear of heights and fear of this and falling down and not having harnesses, and trusting that we are going to be safe. And then from there, moving on to Egypt, which is, again, another level of alchemy, where that water is meeting the stone. And in a way, the codes from the water that the Nile carries with it become encoded in those stones and in those temples.
I'm having like full body chills the entire time that you're talking. Thank you for sharing that with us. Not just in this conversation, but also in the previous, like I can really feel how you have become, meanwhile, that living, walking emissary, but also like keeper of the Nile codes. And so I'd be curious if you, or I'm sure that, also like with your channeling abilities, I know that you're also a probationer consultant in angelic channeling. What are messages or maybe downloads that you have received that you want to share with the audience and like with humanity, what the Nile is encouraging us to step into at this time?
To remember who we are. That is the message. That is, remember. Remember our origins, to remember who we are, to remember our power, which is incredibly important and big nowadays, because over the past few millennia, one message that was drilled into our ancestors was that power resides outside of us. It resides in a system, in the institution, in someone else or somebody else or something else outside of us. And what the Nile is teaching us is to go back inside our heart and to remember who we are.
The rivers of remembrance. So beautiful and powerful. There is people, of course, who cannot physically travel. And you've shared with me that you have a beautiful ritual, a practice for yourself, how you connect and you go on your own inner Nile pilgrimage. Would you share that with us?
Of course. And I appreciate that only a very small number of people will be able to travel as far as that, as far as Uganda, Ethiopia, or Egypt. Majority will not travel, but it doesn't stop anybody from experiencing that travel inside our hearts. And we all can access the Nile through centering ourselves, grounding our energy, centering our breath inside. I always start from the heart center, set the intentions, set the space, ensuring that that space where we are is safe. And because I work with the archangels, I always invite and invoke the four archangels to hold the space, the four corners of the space. And I then invite and invoke the spirit guardians of the River Nile to get closer and to allow me. And I ask for permission to connect with the energy of the River Nile, because we shouldn't take for granted the living bodies of water, the mountains, or anything in the nature is ours for taking. We always need to approach it with reverence and ask for permission to connect. So asking for permission to connect with the consciousness and the energy of the River Nile and the guardians. Some of these guardians were humans who passed on to spirit. Some are still living as guardians. They're living along the banks of the Nile, millions and hundreds of millions of them. And many more were those guardians in the past, as well as unseen beings, the elemental kingdom, and many other animals as well. Beautiful, beautiful animal kingdoms that have been guarding that river. There is a place in Egypt called the Valley of the Whales, where remains of ancient whales are found and are still sort of buried in that sand. Whales once lived along the banks of the River Nile. So there are all these magnificent creatures that serve as guardians, and I ask all of them to grant me permission to connect. And I then start to work and feel, instead of doing the regular sort of feeling the root chakra and, visualizing it having particular color, whether it's red and then sacrum as orange and solar plexus as yellow, etc. Just visualize the River Nile starting from deep inside you, from the womb center, aligning the womb of the Nile and of our planet Earth with our own. For those without a womb, it would be around pelvic area. And allowing our consciousness to come together with a flow, aligning with the flow of the river inside of us, pulling that river. And again, I think we are aided by the fact that the River Nile also flows from south to north. Just like when we raise energy in our bodies, when we work with energy centers or chakras, and we start raising that energy from down from the bottom, basically, of our being, all the way up to our crown chakra. And every single energy center is aligned with the River Nile. So when you get to the higher chakras, to the third eye, to the crown chakra, this is where that beautiful connection with Egyptian temples happens, where the pyramid, sort of the consciousness of the pyramids rests and all of that. So you can use the River Nile to really be your guide in connecting with the source inside of you and to working and embodying that river and asking it to share parts of and remind you of the wisdom stored within you, within your DNA, because as we know, most parts of our DNA are still not familiar. We don't know what is stored there. They're not active. So using the river and working with it consciously in meditation to activate the remembering on our cellular level.
So beautiful. And I can really, while you're talking, like feel the bodily fluids and the water moving inside. So thank you for that. Yeah, transmission activation. Now, take us a little bit through the actual logistics of the upcoming pilgrimage. When is it happening? And where can people find more about it if they feel intrigued to join you?
Yeah, well, for this year, the pilgrimage is a bit staggered. So the first leg of the journey starts on the 28th of July, and we are meeting in Uganda. And we will be traveling around Uganda for 11 days, following the River Nile and meeting the indigenous communities in the northeast of Uganda, so slightly off the sort of route of the Nile, but not too far from the Nile, nevertheless. And the second part of the journey is in October, from the 10th until the 23rd of October. We will be going to Ethiopia. And the third and the last part of the journey for this year is from the 20th of November until the 1st of December in Egypt. For those who are doing all three journeys, there is a special bonus trip which is free of charge for those taking part, but it's a gift from me. And in sort of my gratitude for completing all three parts of the journey, we will be completing the Egyptian Nile pilgrimage with 3 days in the desert, allowing to integrate all the experiences from each section of the Nile pilgrimage and everything coming together. In an ideal world, my dream is to do the Nile pilgrimage in one go. That's how I did it. And I loved it. But I was thinking that perhaps for individual and for practical reasons, when doing it with others, it is probably easier to separate this into 3 journeys. So going forward from next year, these journeys will take place in 3 consecutive months. So the first one is already scheduled for January, Uganda, and then February, Ethiopia, March, Egypt. And these trips are aligned with dry seasons, and they're very much driven by the weather in all 3 countries. And I want them to follow the river, which is why there is always the same sequence of starting with Uganda, then going to Ethiopia and to Egypt. If and when circumstances allow, I would love to include a journey to
Sudan.
Sudan. Yes. So that hopefully, or inshallah, is going to happen at some point in not too distant future, because it is essential. For me, the Nile pilgrimage is not whole without Sudan. And this is one thing that I do every Sunday for more than a year now, the peace meditation. I hold it online. It's free of charge and anybody can access it. They just need to reach out to me and I will send them the link. And it started with the intention of opening up the energy through Sudan and helping the flow of the Nile and the frequencies of peace to be anchored in that part of the world. And I wish things could speed up and I wish the conflict was over. But as healers and anybody who does healing, we all know that it is not in our hands how healing lands and what happens, or the speed with which certain traumas are being resolved. What we should be doing and what we can do is holding the space for and managing frequencies and making sure that the right frequencies are being seeded where it is needed. So it is not just Sudan, but there are many other parts of the world that are included in the peace meditation, because at a time when I started doing that, my heart was really breaking at watching what was going on across the Middle East and the suffering of the children, and not just children, but everybody really, because it is never only children who suffer, everybody suffers, but they make the most shocking sort of images when you see a child in horrendous distress. And I do not intend to stop with the peace meditation, and I will keep going with it for as long as there is a single conflict going on in the world. It will carry on.
If you're curious to make the next step for your own path but don't really know where to begin, then take the Sacred Travel Quiz and reveal how your soul travels and which places hold the clues for your deep soul remembrance. You'll find the link in the show notes. Yeah, I love that. That is, the field keeper, the frequency keeper as the Magdalene to, uphold and just be and emanate.
Yeah.
Wow. I really feel so dreamy right now in a way of not nostalgia. This is the wrong word, but like really, also the desire to like connect more with the Nile and this broader story arc apart or beyond Egypt. Let's put it like that. So, as we come to a close, from your own inner transformation and embodied alchemy, what is the one or maybe two truths you would love every seeker to hold on to?
Meeting oneself in this space of compassionate inquiry with the River Nile. So allowing our true self to emerge, de-armoring ourselves. Stop performing, stop feeling that we have to show up bigger, stronger, or wearing an armor, and allowing the river to release and relieve us of the armor that we've been carrying, and stepping into that inquiry about who I really am. If there is one thing that, for me, I would really love people to take away from this conversation, is really about creating the space for that type of compassionate inquiry.
That's powerful. Yeah. And it opens dialogue with other cultures, with oneself, with the earth. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So tell us where people can find you and also find more about your work, the peace meditations, the pilgrimage, all of it.
Sure. All my work is available and accessible through the website, theriversofremembrance.com. This is where people can reach out to me. They can learn a little bit more about various offerings. There are a few things that I do and always will do free of charge, including the peace meditation, which is taking place every Sunday at 8 p.m. UK time. So that's 9 p.m. European. And in addition to that, I also offer monthly wellness calibration in partnership with my friend and colleague. We do that on the first Sunday of the month at 5 p.m., again, UK time, where we tune into the energetics of the forthcoming month, and we give people tools how to navigate any challenges that may be coming up. We look at the lunation, what is going on with the moon, what is going on with the world, with planets, where we are in terms of solar festivals, and how is that affecting our energy levels, and what is going on. Is it time for going inwards and tending our inner sort of garden and looking after ourselves inside, or is it more outward looking part of the year? And more than that, I'm also doing various workshops and courses, obviously doing the Nile pilgrimage. And I also do one-on-one energy healing sessions for anybody that feels out of alignment in any aspect of their lives. It can be physical, it can be spiritual, emotional. So sometimes we all, myself included, feel that something is a bit out of alignment. And again, I tend to see us as, again, as the River Nile, and trying to bring us back in alignment with the help of healing guides, and obviously always in partnership with a client, because I do believe that we as individuals are sovereigns and we know our bodies best. The only problem to connecting with that bodily wisdom is a lot of time conditioning, being told that somehow knowledge and power reside outside of us. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Eva, for that amazing and beautiful conversation. There was so much depth in that, and I feel that there was a lot for our listeners to unpack. So thank you so much for generously sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Julia. It was a real pleasure and an honor to meet with you. Thank you for holding space and for giving me space on your platform to talk about this work. Thank you.
If this conversation resonated with you and sparked more interest, then go ahead and save Eva's episode from Destination Awakening, part of a broader arc of a brand new docu-series on conscious travel that just launched on this channel. And you'll learn more about the energy and initiations waiting along the Nile pilgrimage and receive also a discount if that journey is calling you. So save it now, and then you can watch it now or later. And I'd like you to reflect on the one thing that you take away from this conversation. And please feel free to share with us in the comments below, or also share the episode with a friend who is intrigued by learning more about travel and the Nile as a conscious pathway to enlightenment. May you remember that you are Starfire incarnate, and I'll see you next time.